out. The video footage of the courtroom altercation spread like wildfire. Within hours, news channels and social media platforms were flooded with headlines. Racist officer attacks judge, subdued in courtroom drama. Clips of Judge Amara Coleman standing tall against Officer Greg Stanton became a symbol of courage and justice. In her chambers, Amara sat quietly at her desk, the weight of the day pressing on her shoulders. Her assistant, Carla, entered hesitantly, holding a stack of newspapers. Judge Coleman, the press is outside. They're calling you a hero, Carla said, setting the papers down. Amara glanced at the headlines but shook her head. This isn't about me being a hero, Carla. It's about holding people accountable, no matter who they are. Carla nodded. I know, but it's not just about today. People are finally talking about the system, about the abuse and the racism. What you did, it's more than just one moment. Before Amara could respond, her phone buzzed. It was the chief of police. She sighed and answered. Judge Coleman, this is Chief Daniels. I want to personally apologize for Officer Stanton's behavior. He's been suspended, and an internal investigation is underway. Amara's voice was calm but firm. Chief Daniels, I hope this investigation goes beyond just one officer. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a systemic problem, and it needs to be addressed. The chief hesitated, but finally said, You have my word. We'll take a hard look at our practices. Amara ended the call and leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She knew this was just the beginning of a larger battle. Officer Stanton faces consequences. Meanwhile, Stanton sat in a cold gray interrogation room at the precinct. His usual air of arrogance was replaced with a simmering frustration. Across from him sat his union lawyer, who looked unimpressed. You assaulted a sitting judge, Greg. This is bad. Really bad, the lawyer said, flipping through a file. They've got video evidence. Public sentiment is against you. There's no spinning this. Stanton scoffed. That judge humiliated me. She made me look like a fool. You did that to yourself, the lawyer shot back. You've got a history of complaints, excessive force, racial profiling. This might be the end of the line for you. Stanton leaned back, his bravado faltering. He had always thought he was untouchable, but now the system he had served was turning against him. Scene: a community united. A week later, Amara stood at the podium of a packed community forum. Hundreds of people had gathered to support her and to discuss the broader issue of systemic racism in law enforcement. We cannot allow fear or prejudice to dictate how we serve justice, Amara said, her voice steady and powerful. What happened in that courtroom was not just about me. It was about all of us, standing up to a system that has failed too many for too long. The crowd erupted in applause. People of all races and backgrounds stood together, united by a shared hope for change. In the back of the room, a young black girl whispered to her mother, I want to be like her when I grow up. Would you like to see the next chapter, such as the trial of Officer Stanton? Scene: the trial of Officer Stanton. The courtroom was packed once again, but this time Officer Greg Stanton was the one sitting in the defendant's chair. His face was pale, his usual bravado reduced to a nervous stillness. Across from him, the prosecutor outlined the charges: assault, misconduct, and obstruction of justice. Judge Amara Coleman was not presiding over this case. She had recused herself to avoid any conflicts of interest. Instead, she sat quietly in the gallery, observing as her colleagues took on the matter. The prosecution wasted no time presenting its case. They showed video footage of Stanton's attack, highlighting his aggression and repeated misconduct as an officer. Witnesses, including court staff, testified about his violent outburst and the inappropriate language he had used against Judge Coleman. When Stanton took the stand, his defense was shaky. He attempted to justify his actions by claiming he felt provoked and disrespected, but the prosecutor's cross-examination dismantled his arguments piece by piece. Officer Stanton, do you believe it's appropriate to assault someone in a courtroom? No, Stanton mumbled. Do you believe it's acceptable to attack a judge, someone sworn to uphold the law? Stanton hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. I made a mistake. A mistake, the prosecutor repeated, his voice heavy with sarcasm. Or a pattern? Let me remind you of the 17 prior complaints filed against you for excessive force and racial bias. The room fell silent. Stanton's shoulders slumped under the weight of his own history. Scene: a symbol of change. Outside the courthouse, a crowd gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for All" and "End Police Violence." Reporters swarmed Judge Coleman as she exited, microphones shoved toward her. "Judge Coleman, how do you feel about Officer Stanton's trial?" one reporter asked. "I'm not here to comment on the outcome," Amara replied. "But I hope this trial serves as a reminder that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it. True justice requires accountability." The crowd cheered as she stepped onto the podium to address the gathering. "Today is not just about one officer or one judge," she began, her voice carrying over the sea of faces. "It's about dismantling systems that allow this kind of behavior to persist. We must demand better training, better oversight, and better leadership." She paused, scanning the crowd. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts here. It starts with us." The verdict. Weeks later, Stanton's trial concluded. The jury returned a guilty verdict on all charges. The announcement sent ripples through the community. For many, it was a rare moment of accountability in a system that often protected its own. Stanton was sentenced to 3 years in prison and stripped of his badge. For the first time, he seemed to understand the gravity of his actions. Amara watched the verdict from her chambers, her emotions a mix of relief and resolve. She knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. Scene: A Legacy Begins. Months after the trial, a new initiative was launched, the Coleman Reform Act. It introduced stricter oversight for law enforcement, mandatory bias training, and increased protections for judicial officers. At the signing ceremony, Amara stood alongside lawmakers and activists, her presence a symbol of resilience. "This is not just my fight," she said during her speech. "It's ours. Together, we can build a justice system that truly lives up to its name." As the crowd erupted into applause, Amara couldn't help but smile. She had fought back, not just against a man, but against a broken system. And she wasn't done yet.